Hello everyone. Today I wanted to look at the astrology chart of Kanye or Ye. Um, I want to look at it through the lens of medical astrology. So um, I'm doing this really because I know he's in the media at the moment due to some of his questionable actions, thoughts, beliefs, things he's saying. I really wanted to look for any indicators in his birth chart that would suggest he has issues around mental health. And just to be clear, I don't take a very conventional approach to mental health. I do think in Ye's case, his mental health or lack thereof is closely tied to spirituality. I think that for a lot of cases, but yeah, that's what I really want to have a look at. So just so you know, the birth time accuracy is questionable. What I do have is 8:45 in the morning. That does make him a Cancer rising, but just realize that this may not be completely accurate. So just for his context, in the past, he stated he is bipolar, experiencing episodes of like mania, racing thoughts, depressive episodes, paranoia. However, recently he states he has been diagnosed as autistic. Make of that what you will. I don't know how accurate it is. I'm just sharing what I know, what I've heard from the media. So let's get into his chart. He is a 12th house Gemini sun. His ascendant is Cancer and he has a moon in Pisces. So I'm going to move through and start by assessing the luminary. So I'm going to look at the sun and moon. So Gemini sun in the 11th house. The sun is the life force, and the life force can be really scattered when it's in Gemini. So when the sun is in Gemini, and this is evidenced within his nervous system. So when his nervous system energy is scattered, his life force is scattered. Geminis will often not eat appropriately or eat properly, or they'll just like rely on snacking or junk food, and that can really exacerbate any nervous system issues. Gemini sun, there is a predisposition to neurological issues, junk food addictions, poor eating habits, which, like I said, affects the nervous system via nutritional deficiencies. There can be mental illness in general. And Judith Hill, in her book, she has stated media and computer addictions, which I think is interesting for Kanye. The sun is conjunct Jupiter. So Jupiter emphasizes the nature of the sun. He emphasizes, enlarges, exacerbates the sun's nature in this placement. So all of that nervous system stuff that we're just talking about is just blown up. It also gives the person a massive ego, especially as it plays out in the 11th and 12th house. Quite famously, he says, "I am a god," and I think he does think he is a god because Jupiter and the sun, Jupiter is Zeus, and the sun is the center of the solar system. Two indicators of God, or the biggest god, are put together at the 11th, 12th house cusp. So the 11th house ruling like greater community, humanity overall. So that's why he feels like he's a god ruling over people. And the 12th house being dreams, delusions, spirituality, and subconscious. So just those two themes there. And his, God complex. If I were consulting him, I would be cautioning him to also look after his respiratory health because of his Gemini sun with a few challenging aspects. It might just take one tough transit to set up the conditions for respiratory illness. So the sun is opposing Neptune, who is in retrograde. So I feel this dynamic may be, I'm going to go into this quite deeply, the main astrological placement that's given him the constitution to become mentally unwell or a little bit detached from reality. Neptune over there in Sagittarius, there may be a desire to seek spirituality by like traveling really far. His creative expression comes from his inner realms, and he finds spiritual internal connection in his inner world. I think there's a potential for heightened mental sensitivity and susceptibility to nervous system stress. Gemini Sun, that mental agility could be constantly challenged by Neptune's dreamy, confusing influence, because they are in opposition to each other. He might also experience periods of like mental fog, difficulty concentrating, or overwhelming imagination that could create some sort of mental exhaustion and affect his physical vitality. Like psychologically, this aspect can create like a real interesting tension because we're in opposition between logical thinking, which is Gemini, and the spiritual, imaginative perception of things, which is Neptunian. So there can be a tendency towards like escapism, a difficulty distinguishing between reality and fantasy, and like a heightened sense of creativity, but coming with some anxiety and confusion. There could be challenges with clear communication due to mental overstimulation, or the imagination sort of taking over his faculties a bit. Neptune is on the cusp of the 6th house, therefore having more input into his health. Neptune and Sag can bring issues of the lower back, hips, thighs, buttocks, and so on. Sorry, not Neptune and Sag, 6th house Sag. But in this case, we're looking for indicators of his mental health in his constitution a bit more. I see this almost like he could have, and we've seen it, but this would be one of the indicators for his like religious fervor and or borderline insanity, that Neptune there. I feel like he would need intensive grounding practices like physical exercise, which would be aligned with that 6th house Sag, to help Neptune to make sure that Neptune doesn't run wild, so that he can stay in reality to a degree. Any sort of activity that would help him establish really good boundaries between the imagination and practical thought and reality. So the Sun is also squaring his Pisces moon. So his ego, which is the Sun, and his emotional needs, which is the moon, are at odds with each other. They're going to be pulling in different directions. The moon forms a T square with the Sun and Jupiter and Neptune. I see a really highly spiritually inclined, intuitive person who is struggling to incorporate these opposing parts of himself. I think his spiritually open nature, some might say mental illness, has left him open to spiritual and mental manipulation. It's really easy to make him appear crazy or to actually send him crazy, in my opinion, based on what I read in the chart. So his Pisces moon in the 9th, that's a really dreamy Pisces moon, makes him deeply emotional beneath all that ego. This is a person who loves to escape reality. He's very intuitive again. And he may like to escape reality through things like his imagination, drugs, food, sex, and all things that we've heard over the years that he has been known to overindulge in. And the moon in Pisces is in the 9th. So the 9th house has a lot to do with like physical movement and exercise. So Pisces moon here suggests he may not be very keen on vigorous exercise and finds it hard to stimulate his body into such things, preferring to exercise his mind and his subconscious more than his physical body. Okay, let's move on to his ascendant. So he's a Cancer ascendant. If this is accurate, this would explain why physically he has a tendency towards being a softer shaped person. Like he's always had a roundness to his face. And almost like I've always thought he had a very sweet face. Like when he smiles, when he's not saying insane things or vulgar things, he has a very sweet smile and a sweetness to his face. And that is very Cancer ascendant. Cancer is ruled by the moon, and the moon brings that soft roundness to things. It also explains why he appears to be so loving of his mother. And I'm sure he is, but it's very to the forefront of his identity, I guess. The first house tells a lot about how one's health handles stress. Cancer ascendant suggests he could be prone to things like emotional eating. And the sixth house, which is always very important in medical astrology, we've touched on it before, but it is ruled by Sagittarius with Neptune on the cusp. A Sag sixth house needs to engage in lots of physical movement, which is very interesting because I just said how the moon, he doesn't really want to. But his sixth house, which is where we have to be of service and of duty to ourselves every day as a ritual, day in, day out, where we are servants to our physical health. There needs to be lots of physical movement. He cannot overindulge in fatty, decadent foods. That's very Jupiterian, the ruler of Sag. He needs to stay away from them to really maintain his health. And I'm talking about on like a day-to-day basis. So this is like the diet he should eat, the type of nutrition he should have, the stuff he should do every day. So Sagittarians do really well on whole grains, lots of fresh fruit and veg, and some red meat. When you think of Sagittarius, you think of a centaur, half man, half beast. So there is that need for almost eating like a horse, if that makes sense. So the grains, the greens, a little bit of meat. There's a particular emphasis for him on nervous system health. So Sag rules the motor nerves, but directly across on the axis there we've got Gemini, which is like the central nervous system. So just nerves in general. So foods made from really high quality fats like eggs, nuts, seeds, avocados, fatty fish would be really beneficial to him very regularly in his diet to help support nerve health. Heaps of time in nature would really help regulate his nervous system, because you think of a centaur or a horse, they need to be running in paddocks, free, fresh air, lots of green grass to support their health. So he would need that. He would literally need time in nature and an opportunity to run in the field and just let it all out. That would be really amazing for his health, because what he doesn't deal with in that sixth house becomes 12th house issues, which would be Gemini nature, which would be all the neurological issues, could be lung issues, respiratory, but a real emphasis there on that nervous system issue. Chiron is in Taurus in a conjunction with Venus and Mars at the top of his chart there. I see this as he has a wound, that's Chiron, around material abundance, that's Taurus. So I also see he would be like very sexually like hedonistic in an attempt to cover up that pain or wound, because we have Venus and Mars together, and Venus is like what you value, and Mars is sexuality, desire, aggression, and bringing those together in Taurus with your Chiron wound. Yeah, that's just how I see it. There'd be that wound. So he may be very hedonistic in an attempt to cover up that wound. Chiron here also suggests a wound around his physical appearance or his weight, potentially. So I think that's a sore spot for him, especially if people see him as a glutton or physically not good enough. I think it also suggests a tendency towards metabolic issues, because Taurus by nature likes to hold and retain and take into the body, so weight, especially endocrine, especially like thyroid issues. I think that would be a really hard Chiron to have, especially when you live in a world of excess that can be used to disguise your insecurities. And his Chiron there is at the top of his chart, so I think it's quite obvious to everyone who sees him, knows him, Mars, so the Mars is often looked at as the seat of inflammation, is also in Taurus, but is making an opposition, with that conjunction to Venus, but it is making an opposition to Uranus and Scorpio. So he really needs to make sure he doesn't cause inflammation in his colon. There could be a predisposition for sudden or unusual issues of the male reproductive system or the colon, especially with that Taurus Scorpio axis. That's quite often a lot to do with the excretion of toxins in the bowels. Saturn, we often look at Saturn as the seat of chronic disease, or where there is an underfunctioning, a stiffening, a restriction, a coldness, where everything slows down. And that's why it's often the seat of chronic disease or a driver. His Saturn is in Leo in the second house. So his Saturn is actually really well aspected, besides that one aspect to Uranus. All of his challenges around ego, spirituality, the home, will end up making him financially very well, because Saturn will reward you eventually after a long time of hard work. But the second house has a lot to do with self-esteem. Saturn here suggests he has to work extremely hard to build that self-esteem. Saturn in Leo will also suggest he needs to watch out for his heart, especially because Saturn is making a square to Uranus. Anything that's sudden, unexpected, abrupt, unusual, that energy can affect his heart. So, as he gets older, if he was my client, I would say, let's make sure your heart health is up to scratch and we get that checked out. Also, like a stiffening of the spine. So that rulership of Leo over the heart and spine, and that stiffening, constricting nature could manifest as that. But yeah, definitely the heart. And just have a quick look at Mercury, who is in Taurus at the other end there, in the 11th. I want to look at Mercury, because we're looking at his mental health. Mercury in Taurus can give like a beautiful richness to someone's voice. I think he kind of has that. He has like a nice voice. It's not in conjunction with Chiron, but they're both within Taurus, so their energies sort of affect each other. And I would interpret that as he has like a wound potentially, or a sore spot around his ability to communicate. Oh, the other thing is that, because Taurus is a very slow, steady sign, when you have a Mercury in Taurus, yeah, it can make it harder to communicate. I have Mercury in Taurus, and I'm not very good at speaking sometimes. So in summary, I've written this out. Kanye emerges as a profoundly complex individual whose astrological chart reveals a real delicate balance between genius and vulnerability. His astrological blueprint, his chart, points to a multifaceted psychological landscape where creativity and mental fragility, emphasis on that, dance together. The interplay of his Gemini Sun, Pisces Moon, and a few big aspects there paint a picture of an individual with extraordinary potential, but also challenged by some real deep internal tensions, especially on that spiritual, emotional level. At the core of his constitution lies a remarkable sensitivity, a neurological and emotional makeup that both fuels his creative brilliance, and I do think he's creatively brilliant, and exposes him to significant mental health challenges. So that's that tension dynamic. His chart suggests a person who experiences life with intense depth and intensity, constantly navigating between heightened spiritual perception and the practical demands of reality. The multiple challenging aspects, particularly the Sun-Neptune opposition and the T-square involving his luminaries, indicate a persistent internal conflict that manifests as both his greatest strength and his most significant vulnerability. I'm just going to actually draw that in for you quickly. This, and this, I think, are the three biggest players in his chart affecting his mental and emotional health. Physically and mentally, he appears predisposed to nervous system sensitivity, metabolic fluctuations, and a susceptibility to both creative inspiration and mental overwhelm. His chart speaks to someone who requires careful self-management, grounding practices, nutritional support, and strategies that can help channel his inner experiences constructively. Being a celebrity and having so much money and accolades and having a God complex, which he does, bless him, he does, it's really hard to be grounded in reality because most people aren't going to say no to you. Most people are just going to be like, okay, yeah, sure, you're Kanye West. Okay, fine. You want to say something outrageous or offend me? That's fine. So it's very hard for him to be grounded, I think, because who's really going to say no to him? Some people are starting now, but still, I think that's really emphasized, and potentially even worsened some of his issues. Ultimately, his chart tells a story of a wounded healer, an individual with extraordinary gifts who must continuously work to integrate his complex inner world. His chart suggests that his greatest challenges are also the source of his most remarkable and creative and personal potential. So, offering a profound testament to the intricate relationship between genius, sensitivity, and psychological complexity. So, look, we've all, no matter what you think of him, he's had some amazing music, very unique music. He's a prolific creator. He's always been inclined towards spirituality. At times it's become very Christian. Other times I would say it's gone very demonic. I think he has this interesting dynamic where, because his ego and his subconscious and Neptune they're all at odds with each other. He makes for a person who can be manipulated. His mental, psychological, spiritual inner world is so delicate and so complex that, if some agency wanted to come along and him in the head, it'd be very easy to do so. You wanted to brainwash him, you could. You wanted to, make him appear crazy, you could. You want to make him actually crazy? Yeah, you could, because he's quite delicate in that sense. Anyway, I think that's it. So my name is Ash. I am a naturopath in Perth, Western Australia. I also practice medical astrology, Reiki, tarot card readings. And so this is kind of the convergence of, my naturopathic health training, health science, and my love for astrology and medical astrology. And I do readings. So if that's something you're interested in, please go to my website, www.Biosoul.naturopathy.com. Otherwise, I really hope you like that, and I hope you found it interesting. See ya.